Well, welcome to tonight's lecture. Sandy and Brian are going to talk about RC Chambers, part two. Sandy and I did part one about a year ago. And his relationship with John Daly was something we could not fit into a 45-minute lecture last time. So he's an interesting guy. Takes a little more time to cover him. So I just want to introduce you to Sandy and Brian. Most of you know these two fine gentlemen. They give outstanding lectures, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the introductions because we got to get to the main event. Brian is a graduate at the University of Utah in geology and geological engineering. He spent about 5 decades working in various mining engineering, metallurgy roles across the Intermountain West. Lots of mining experience. And foremost, fortunately for the Friends of Ski Mountain Mining History, he is our project manager working with various contractors on stabilizing our lovely historic mining infrastructure that has in recent years begun falling down around us. So he's intimately involved in saving those. Sandy Brumley is actively involved in providing hiking tours and ski tours for the Friends at Park City Mountain and more recently at Deer Valley, right? Very, very interested in local mining history. And we're lucky that he takes that interest because he helps us understand people like RC Chambers. Without further ado, I will hand the microphone over to these fine gentlemen. Thank you. And, could you please hold your questions until the end of the talk? Thank you.
All right, yeah, so as Mark has suggested, we really needed to have a separate section on John Daly. He very much was sort of given his start from RC Chambers. Robert Craig Chambers, RC was how he always appeared in the newspapers, and he was Craig to his friends, but and I'm sure that's what John Daly called him as well. But when we realized that we weren't going to be able to fit the Daly section into part one, I went to Mark and I said, well, let's just do a second one on John Daly. He said, I'm not going to do that with you. You're going to have to talk to Brian Buck about that one because he's really the Daly expert. So while I come into this equation knowing nothing about mining, nothing about any of the engineering, I rely on these guys to bring me home.
And it's fun to do a presentation with Sandy because you'll get a little bit of drift. Sandy is very interested in the social aspects of mining. There's always intrigue in the lifestyles and the history of these different actors in the mining business. And I'm an engineering geek, and so I'm more interested in the technological stuff and the history of the actual mining operations themselves. So hopefully we'll bounce off each other in a productive way.
So you're saying between the two of us, I'm the drama queen? Is that what it is?
No.
Okay, so just a little bit of background on Chambers and how he came to Park City. He came from a successful career already in Nevada in the Comstock lode, and so he was a man of some wealth, and he came looking for new claims. Marcus Daly, a different Daly, had suggested that he come here and pointed him towards a mine called the McHenry mine. He went out, looked at that mine, decided against it. But there were a bunch of prospectors in what's now called Ontario Canyon who had discovered a claim called the Ontario. Chambers, or excuse me, Hearst first started talking to those guys about buying the claim, but he really didn't. He was such a well-known character. He didn't think he was going to get a good deal on the purchase, and so he brought Chambers in as kind of an intermediary to actually buy the claim. And that started a partnership between the two of those guys that lasted right up until Hearst's death in 1891. So while we did cover an historic arc on the Ontario in part one, it's really to understand John Daly and how he relates to Chambers. It's important to understand the background on that on that Ontario claim. So I think you're going to talk a little bit about how they bought that. And
I am. You know, if you look at the history of this transaction between the claimants who owned the claims that the Ontario mine eventually became, and Chambers and Hearst and that team, you learn that this transaction occurred with $27,000 to purchase these claims. And some consider this just a pittance for a property that eventually produced over $50 million in revenue and over $15 million in dividends to the shareholders. But I think you need to keep in mind, just a sec. I think you need to keep in mind the timing of the day, and that is these prospectors who sold this property were lucky to make $300 to $400 a year. And a lot of prospectors were flat broke at that time. And so for them to sell this property for $27,000 was a tremendous amount of money. And $27,000 in this transaction was 77 times the annual income of a laborer like a prospector at the time in the United States. So that was a good-sized fortune for them at the time. So a little bit about John Daly coming into the scene. John Daly had prospecting experience in Montana and Nevada before he took a job at the Ontario Silver Mine in 1881. So he already knew quite a bit about mining and geology. He thought the rich silver lode that was being mined in the Ontario could extend further west off of the Ontario claim block into Empire Canyon. So he either staked or purchased 24 mining claims just to the west of the Ontario silver mining property and proceeded to file patent applications on all those claims. He drove a tunnel from the bottom of Empire Canyon into the divide between Empire Canyon and Ontario Canyon, and he was looking for the same lode, the Ontario vein, and he found it. He then sank a shaft and started to build out the infrastructure of that mine, and that became the Daly Mining Company in 1885. So then he went on to develop the Daly West Mine and the Daly Judge Mines, which eventually included the Anchor, Quincy, and the Little Bell properties. I think he wisely included R.C. Chambers as a director and the president of the Daly Mining Company. And Sandy will talk a little bit about that history between R.C. Chambers and John Daly.
yeah, so the thing that I kind of discovered in doing the research here is that Brian is totally correct. Daly was looking to Chambers as a person who knew just a little bit more about how to operate mines as opposed to find the minerals. But also Chambers was connected to Hearst, and there were some very deep pockets there. So as he was buying these claims, I have a suspicion that a lot of the money to purchase the claims was coming from that deep pocket of Hearst.
So this slide is showing the silver production in Park City mines, the major mines in Park City, through 1901, which is the year when R.C. Chambers died. And so you can say that these mines were in operation when he could have had an influence on them. He was the general manager of the Ontario Silver Mine. He was also the general manager and president of the Daly Mine. And he and Hearst and others were major shareholders in the Daly West Mine. So you can see the total production in the Park City district through that time, through 1901, was over 65 million ounces of silver sold. The 4 mining operations shown in this table, including the Silver King mine, which we don't know that Chambers or Daly had any interest in that, Those 4 mines accounted for 95% of the total silver production in the Park City district up until 1901. And if you look at those 3 mines that he was involved in, the majority of the silver was produced in those 3 mines that he was involved in. Over 80% of the production in the Park City district through 1901 was from those 3 mines. And so I think this just shows that R.C. Chambers was a major influence on the mining business here in Park City. And he was responsible for the mining operations that produced most of the silver up through 1901. So it's no wonder why John Daly was very interested in being involved with R.C. Chambers in starting his career in developing mines. A little bit about his background. John Joseph Daly was born in Illinois in 1853, and he's the son of James and Mary Moxham Daly. His father died in 1861, and his mom passed in 1863, so John was orphaned at 10 years old. He had just 2 years of schooling when he left town and took a job as a cabin boy on a Missouri River steamboat. And he was 14 at the time. So life was hard, and he got up to Fort Benton, Montana, and as just a young man, not even a teenager. And so he took work with traders, Indian traders. Fort Benton at the time was a major location of itinerant people coming up the river and then moving into the Montana backcountry, and also was very close to the Indian tribal lands up there. So he was employed by a couple of these Indian traders, and he also met prospectors, and he learned about prospecting. At the ripe old age of 16, he moved 600 miles to the White Pine Mining District in eastern Nevada, and that district is just about 30 miles west of the city of Ely, if you know where Ely is. And where a silver mining boom was actively going on at the time. And that silver mining boom attracted more than 12,000 people at the time that he was a visitor there, and he moved in and took work there. And so I think that was a perfect environment for him to learn about the silver mining business, because it was booming like crazy in that mining district at the time. That silver boom began to wane by 1870, so it's not surprising that John did some prospecting in Utah in 1873. That was shortly after the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and so there was a wave of prospectors that were coming to Utah in the early 1870s, including John. And he eventually then relocated to Salt Lake City in 1876, and he found initial employment at the penitentiary as a worker at the penitentiary, and he had time to do prospecting in the Wasatch Mountains and in the Wasatch Back, eventually joining some other prospectors, and they staked claims in what we now call Bonanza Park.
So Daly's debut in Park City, his first appearance in the newspapers was in 1880. And you can see they're referring to him as Johnny Daly, so he was not an established character at that point. But the legend holds that he walked up Daly Canyon with a roll of money and would buy claims from the various miners that were up in that canyon. By October of 1880, he turns up in the Salt Lake Herald as having started work on what was then called the Federal Tunnel. By 1882, it's then referred to as a Daly Tunnel. But he also reports that there's a block of claims that he has surveyed and is grouping together to make a mine. But the question that occurs to me as I look at this is, how does a prison guard afford to make those kind of purchases? And so the answer, I think, is that he had some help. In 1881, the activity picks up sharply, right? He's got 2 tunnels that are driven. I kind of drew them out on the map in the red. He's filed patents on the Sandy Hook and Alice Ryan claims. They're smack in the middle of those 2 tunnels. So you can begin to see his strategy in developing the claims around him. You can see on the map there's a group that's referred to as the Daly Group. There are 25 claims, and what he's doing with these tunnels is driving in to really see, where the ore veins are, and that would drive, where he would develop shafts to exploit them. Interestingly enough, at that same time, there's another mine way on the other side of town, the Crescent Mine. It's over in Thanes Canyon. He's hired as the supervisor of that mining development by Edward P. Ferry. So then the question becomes, well, who owns John Daly? Where's this money coming from? And I think the smoking gun, there's a secret that's kind of kept through the early part of the 1880s. Daly's doing all these activities. All the newspaper reporting is saying that he's really the sole operator. As late as January of 1884, when he's asked, well, who owns the Daly properties, he reports, my wife and children form the company. Yet in November, the company is formed, and Chambers is named as the president. And reports of that time show that Daly actually kept a 1/5 share of his mining development, and 4/5 share was owned by Hearst and his partners. And so to me that says, well, maybe they were doing the same thing with John Daly as Hearst did with Chambers, using Daly as a bit of a front to get a better deal on those mining properties. Once it didn't matter anymore, once the assemblage had been completed, why then Chambers could step out from behind the curtain and be the president. So the Daly mine in Empire Canyon, we're going to let Brian talk about that.
So as Sandy said, the Daly mine was organized in 1885, and the initial development was via tunnels driven into the east side of Empire Canyon. And eventually they sank the Daly number 1 shaft and the Daly number 2 shaft. The mine was connected underground to the Ontario mine, and that this allowed haulage of ore out of the mine, drainage of water out of the mine, and materials to come into the mine via the workings of the Ontario mine. And in fact, the operation of the Daly mine was managed by R.C. Chambers and the other management of the Ontario mine. The chief mechanic, the superintendents, the managers that were managing the Ontario mine also managed the Daly mine at the time. So all the ore from the Daly mine was found in 6 veins, or we call them lodes, and the main production came from the Daly vein. And that vein continued off the west end of the Daly mine property into the direction of what we now know as the Daly West property. The mine operation located in this photograph in the bottom of Empire Canyon, called the Massachusetts Mine, was first opened by the Empire Mining Company way back in the 1870s, and then was reorganized into the Massachusetts. But note how much lower in the canyon it is than the Daly mine facilities. And this is a major reason why the Massachusetts mine never really was a going concern. It was plagued with a lot of groundwater. And you can see it's located right in the bottom of Empire Canyon. So it's pretty close to the water table.
Yeah, just a quick comment from my friends from Deer Valley. I see a couple of colleagues here. This photo is basically shot from a location very close to where the Montage Hotel is these days. Daly 1 is down in the canyon a little bit. Daly 2 is on the same platform as the North Side chairlift. So when you're walking around that neighborhood, that's where the Daly 2 was. There's no evidence of the shaft. Brian and I have spent ridiculous amounts of time pondering where it might be, but we think it's either in the middle of the traffic circle there, but the condos, or on the corner. It's in one of 2 places.
Take your pick.
We hope they have built a condo on top.
So things picked up at the Daly mine. The Daly vein, or lode, was an unbelievably terrific producer of silver lead ore. It also carried some copper, gold, and zinc. Most of the ore coming out of that vein did require some milling. but some was of high grade or direct shipping grade. By 1886, the mine had produced ore containing over 1.2 million ounces of silver and 1,500 ounces of gold. So in a year after they organized the company, it had that kind of production. That ore was processed in the Marsac Mill, which already had been built and was operating in Park City. And in 1887, the Daly Mining Company bought that mill and continued to operate it until 1901. In 1887, the Daly mine began a long string of regular dividends to its shareholders and paid out 2.8, almost 2.9 million in dividends between 1887 and 1896. And that would be worth over $109 million today. That same year, he contracted with the Anchor Mining Company to drive the drainage tunnel from Lower Empire Canyon up to under the Anchor Shaft, which was being flooded by groundwater at the time. And so by 1888, Daly resigned as the superintendent of the Daly Mining Company, and operational control was completely provided by R.C. Chambers and others from the Ontario mine. So Daly took his spare time and continued his quest to follow the ore veins in Empire Canyon. So it was clear to him that the ore vein structures in the Daly mine continued to the southwest. And so he began accumulating mining claims in that direction. The original property position that he assembled included 40 mining claims, and it was called the Daly West property. Adjacent to the Daly West property was the Mears Morgan Mining Company claim block. And it was obvious that this juxtaposition of these two claim blocks could result in disagreements in the future between the two mining companies. That is, who would control the ore in that countryside? The Daly West was half owned by Daly and the other half by R.C. Chambers, Hagen, Hearst, and they were organized into what was called the Ivanhoe Mining Company. A mine shaft was started in 1891, and by 1892, it was down over 1,200 feet and connected with the Daly mine underground. In 1893, Daly incorporated his interests, his half interest, into what was called the Daly West Mining Company. Then the silver panic of 1893 set in with the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890, and that led to an economic depression. Daly was superintendent of the Daly West and continued mining operations, resulting in finding large ore bodies in 1894 and building a new mill in 1895. And that was the first wet concentrating mill built in the Park City district, the first modern concentrator in the district. Between 93 and 98, production in the Daly West was curtailed, and only 650,000 ounces of silver were produced in those 5 years. In 1899, J.E. Bamberger bought out the Ivanhoe Mining Company interest, so the other half of the property interest, and took over control of the Daly West property. And then the operations really began to roll. Between 1899 and 1905, over 17 million ounces of silver were sold out of that mine, producing over $10 million in revenue and over $5 million in dividends.
So I want to back up in the timeline a little bit. It's going back to 1883 when this adjacent mining company was formed. And so on the map here, you can kind of see at the top of the photograph, there's where the Mears shaft is. It's right off the right-hand corner of that little square block. And then the Daly West shaft, we know today the Daly West shaft is right outside the Montage Hotel, right on that platform next to the Empire Chairlift. And so all of this activity is happening in that area. There's also on this map the Anchor Shaft, which is located up just off the Orion ski trail. So if you take Empire up, come down Orion, just about a third of the way down is a flat spot where that shaft was. And so what's interesting about this particular transition was There was a lease that was struck by Philip Morgan. He leased it to a guy named George Muir to develop the property. He had backing from the Walker Brothers, which was actually sort of the Mormon investment banking company. But in early 1885, Simon Bamberger turns up with a better offer to Morgan. He says, and Morgan sues, trying to get out of his deal with Mears. Things escalate. There's a three-corner lawsuit with Mears Silver Mining Company suing the Morgan Silver Mining Company. They're actually partners. And then they both seek to block a patent from John Daly. So there was a lot of expectation that there was going to be fabulous wealth in this area, and a lot of fighting over what's really speculation. And there was also a tunnel driven into the Grizzly claim, which is just below, right in between those two markers that say Muir Shaft and the Daly West Shaft, is where there was a Grizzly tunnel that was dug. What happens in 1885 is the Morgan guys trying to get out of that deal. They show up with Winchesters and take over the Grizzly tunnel. They try to kick the Mears people out. There's another interesting kind of photo here for our Deer Valley folks. This is a man standing. Well, first of all, let's orient us by right here is the intersection between Pearl and Dakota. So if you ski down and you're at the bottom of where that switchback comes around on Pearl and it intersects with Dakota, you're standing right there. So you're above the Grizzly Tunnel. You're above this West Ontario shaft. And then here's an interesting photograph of a guy standing out there in front of this property. There's no record as to who the guy is. Is it Morgan? Is it Mears? Or is it maybe Farish, the guy that dug that shaft? Kind of a bit of an unknown. But Mike O'Malley and I have been up there, dragged my wife Terry with us, and we did a little hiking around trying to see if we could find the Grizzly Tunnel. We couldn't find that, but we did find that West Ontario shaft. And so these are the kinds of stories that I'm always digging for, right? Guys with guns trying to take over tunnels. Yeah, we're talking Wild West. Okay, so the Morgan Silver Mining Company had very much a checkered past. By 1890, that three-cornered lawsuit was dismissed. In 1891, Mears reports to one of the local newspapers that at that point in time, he spent about $500,000 in developing the property. About $150,000 of it were legal expenses, just trying to defend the different lawsuits that were around the thing. But by 1893, the company starts to restructure. This is again, in the middle of that panic of 1893. Morgan gets a stronger hand. Ore shipments actually happen, not in a great amount, but they begin to happen. But sadly, in desperation, probably due to the financial climate of the 1893, Mears commits suicide. And so that kind of removes him from that equation. Things lumber on rather slowly for these guys. While Daly was successful in continuing development, they didn't really have the capital wherewithal. And so by 1897, John Daly buys a quarter of the Morgan Mining Company. Ultimately, in 1899, I think perhaps following that same pattern as Daly's using a front guy named Theodore Brubeck, who buys the balance of the property for $100,000. So, poor Mears, he spent over $500,000 developing it. The yield is probably $100,000 to $125,000 that he pulled out of it, and so you can imagine that's why he felt so desperate.
Thank you. I smell dinner. Is it bacon or is it steak? Are you wearing your bacon cologne tonight, or? Okay. So John Daly was the general manager of the Daly West until 1899, when the Bambergers came in and took control of it, and John Daly was out. So he took his family to California and had an extended stay in California, and then they went off to Europe for an extended vacation in Europe. And in 1901, it's recorded that here's John Daly back, and he's talking about developing a mining operation in his old stomping ground, Bonanza Flat, and he started accumulating mining claims there. Kind of in a repeat of his performance on accumulating mining claims for the Daly mine. He also joined the Hawkeye McHenry Mining Company, which is located east of the Ontario property, as the VP. So I'm going to move on here to the 1902 mine disaster. In 1902, it was common practice for underground mines to store explosives underground in rooms, and those rooms were called powder magazines. And they were typically separated from the active mining area by quite a distance underground. At about 11:15 p.m. on July 15th, 1902, dynamite in a powder magazine on the 1,200 level, that's 1,200 feet deep, of the Daly West mine reportedly exploded and then set afire explosives that were stored there as well. The shift boss at the surface of the Daly West shaft that night and the hoist operator could hear and also feel a muffled boom when the magazine went up. And shortly after, the station tender at the 900 level, which was quite a distance above, came to the surface in the shaft and said that there had been an explosion deeper in the mine than his level at 900. So this started what was a gruesome period of attempted rescue by miners and town residents who all flocked up to the Daly West shaft after that news hit town. The news of that disaster rapidly spread all across the U.S., and so you can see some of, in the slide, some of the headlines caused by this disaster. Yeah. The explosion and fire was reported to have involved over 4 tons of explosives, and it created a huge amount of combustion gas that is toxic in high concentrations. And this gas traveled down all the different various openings into the deeper areas of the Daly West mine, where it asphyxiated and poisoned the miners at work there. The immediate response to this explosion was to lower volunteers down the shaft into the mine to search for the victims. And eventually they brought up 24 miners who were dead. Early on, all the volunteers who went down into the mine were also overcome by the gas and had to be revived when they came back up to the surface. And 4 of the rescuers that night also died of their efforts, bringing the total list of the dead in the Daly West mine to 28. Now, the Daly West 1,200 level was a tunnel connected with the nearby Daly and the Ontario mines, and it extended 2.5 miles to its opening, its portal, in Lower Ontario Canyon. The gas traveled through this tunnel into these other mines and all the way 2.5 miles to the tunnel portal, killing another 6 in the Ontario mine, along with some draft horses that were at work at the time in the tunnel. The total number of mining victims in this biggest mine disaster in Park City was 34. So the Daly West Mining Company responded immediately with emergency care for the families of the dead and also the rescuers whose health was impacted, some of them permanently. The company promptly paid families of the deceased, single victims, $1,000 in cash. Widows of the deceased were paid $2,000 in cash, and their children $500 each. So a family with 2 kids was paid $3,000 for the loss of their dad and husband, which would be worth today about $110,000. This was greatly appreciated by the entire Park City community. The Utah mine inspector and multiple court cases held afterwards exonerated the mining company because the practice was a common practice in the industry at the time, and there were no regulations that outlawed it. But shortly thereafter, the Utah legislature passed the first law banning storage of large amounts of explosives underground. So we'll talk a little bit about the Quincy mine. The Quincy mine is located just to the east of the Daly West mine, And at the time these mines were going on, all the timber was cut in the canyons. You see in these historic photographs, there's no trees. And so snow avalanches were common on these high mountain slopes around Park City in the 1880s. And many of the mines were impacted by avalanches, including all the mines in Empire Canyon at some point in time were impacted by an avalanche. And this was the case with the Quincy mine in 1903, when an avalanche hit the mine's surface plant just before noon, and it crushed the hoisting works and buildings and entombed 9 workers at the surface. Before others could arrive from the nearby Daly West to dig them out, 3 of them had suffocated and perished. The event was tragic, but the timing was probably fortunate, because if it had happened 15 minutes later, the crew working underground would have been in the process of being lifted to the surface for lunch. And there could have been as many as 60 people in the path of the avalanche when it occurred. As it happened, the underground crew could not come up the Quincy shaft because it was plugged with snow, and they walked underground in connection tunnel to the nearby Little Bell mine and escaped there. The Daly West mine eventually acquired the Quincy in 1902, and a major connection between the Daly West shaft and the Quincy property was completed. So after that, all the mining in the Quincy was done underground via the Daly West shaft. And this was not uncommon in the mining practices of the day. They were all connected. So now we'll talk a little bit about the Little Bell. The Little Bell mine is only 700 feet south of the Quincy. And the property was claimed in 1880, but no real development work of any consequence occurred. In 1901, Solon Spiro made his move into mining in Park City, acquiring controlling interest in the Little Bell, the Lucky Bill, and the Bogan mining properties at the time. A shaft was started at the Little Bell and sunk to 800 feet deep, with multiple levels driven from the shaft, including a tunnel to connect to the 200 level of the Quincy. The Daly West gained partial control of the Little Bell in 1902, in part because the Bamberger brothers had interests in both the Daly West and the Little Bell. Not much production occurred until 1906, when good ore was discovered, and then again in 1909, and regular ore shipments were started. And Solon Spiro controlled the Little Bell at the same time. He acquired and further developed the Bogan property into what we now know as the famous Silver King Consolidated Mine.
I'm going to flip back a couple of slides just to show my friends from Deer Valley. The Quincy mine is actually located along the Banner Ski Trail. It's the platform that's up and to the left of the ski trail. The Little Bell mine, this ore bin right there, still exists. And it's one of the success stories of the Friends of Ski Mountain Mining history. We preserved that object a few years back, so you can. It's always a part of the ski tours that we give over there. And Mike O'Malley and Carl Lund from the Friends of Ski Mountain Mining history give those tours. Anyway, now coming back to the Anchor Mine, we're going to drop back on that timeline again. It was formed way back in 1885. Managed by E.P. Ferry, so he was sort of the original capitalist here in Park City. John Daly was on the board, and as early as 1885, there were hoisting works installed. There were adjacent claims purchased in 1886 to consolidate the property, and prospecting verified the size of the vein. There was a lot of optimism around how much they were going to be able to pull out of it. But it flooded very quickly. And so as a result of that flooding, John Daly was hired, as we talked about earlier, to dig a drain tunnel. By 1889, he'd reached the location of the mine, but at that point, they were not successful in connecting the drain tunnel. Their major issues continued. That by the time they'd sunk to only the 600-foot level, they were hitting water. Pumps were installed, but in this era, the pumps were primitive and expensive to operate. Daly drove that tunnel in at the 1,200-foot level because that was optimistically where this mine was headed. But it took some years to actually connect the shaft to the drain tunnel. There was an effort in 1889 where a 6-inch borehole was drilled. In 1890, an 8-inch hole was bored, but it was delayed by fire, and so it wasn't until somewhat later that the tunnel was connected. This photograph on the right shows the actual flow of water coming out of that shaft once it was finally connected to the tunnel. In 1891, the tunnel and shaft are finally connected. Shipments begin, big deal for a mining company in 82 or 92. But then the silver panic kind of dampens profits. Things move slowly until about 1897 when a mill is opened at the mouth of that tunnel. And then 1902, as Brian mentioned earlier, is when the Daly Judge Mining Company was formed and development began in earnest. So here's a stock certificate from the mining company and a shot there of the mine location up on the Orion Ski Trail at Deer Valley, kind of right down near where right next to it's that flat platform right next to the Empire Chair. And so what happened in at this point is that John Daly bought out the interests of Mary Harney Judge. She was the wife of John Judge, another famous Park City miner, and the source of the name on the Daly Judge Mining Company. He also bought out, this is an interesting little side story, there was a guy named Edwin Holmes that owned a major interest in the mine, and he was actually the second husband of Park City's Silver Queen. Her wealth began with an investment in the Silver King mine, but when she married Edwin Holmes, as they put their fortunes together, she became even more wealthy through investments. Okay, this is a side elevation of the Daly Judge mine, and I know it's a very busy chart, so I'm just going to point out a couple of key things. The first thing really is just the true extent. All of these little boxes, those are called stopes, and those are where they found major deposits of silver. You can see the stopes are connected to horizontal tunnels or drifts, as they're called. And so I've got a little blow up of this one that shows really why they did it this way. They actually dug upward in the stopes so that the ore would fall down and into a tunnel like this one right here. And at the 1,200-foot level, it's connected to the drain tunnel, and they're able to haul the ore out very efficiently that way. Brian, it's back to you.
So the poor old Daly West just couldn't get a break. And in December of 1913, the entire mine and mill burned to the ground overnight. The company, of course, immediately rushed the design and construction of replacement facilities that were built in 1914 and 1915. And the new mine and mill buildings were steel structures with all brand new mining and milling equipment. And operations began in 1915, but the mill didn't work really well, and the returns were unsatisfactory for the metal prices at the time. The mill was then redone in 1918 with the hope of reprocessing the nearby tailings from the prior years, but again, without much success. So by 1919, the mill was shut down. And the ore that was mined after that in the Daly West was sent via the connection with the Judge Tunnel to the Daly Judge Mill. The Daly West shaft continued to be used for underground mining and exploration into the 1980s, when all the mining operations in Park City ceased. The Daly surface plant that remained was gradually dismantled and sold off until a fire in 1972 destroyed everything that was left. The only remaining structures were the steel headframe and a new hoist house, but use and maintenance of the shaft eventually ceased. The surface of the mine property was repurposed for the Deer Valley Resort, and for the Montage Deer Valley Resort Hotel. And in May 2015, the top of the shaft itself collapsed, forming a crater that caused the head frame, the 1914 steel head frame, to topple over. Multiple stakeholders in the community cooperated to plug the shaft and repair the damaged head frame and re-erect it about 100 feet from the shaft. And you can get all the details on these efforts by going to the museum's YouTube postings and reviewing other presentations that have been done on this. Parts of that damaged 1914 steel head frame that had to be cut out and replaced with new were actually recycled into a publicly displayed art sculpture at the head of the rail trail in town that you can visit.
So what's interesting about John Daly is that he became increasingly wealthy, right? And so he did this basically through a progression of his investments. The Daly mine, he had only a quarter share or a quarter share interest in that one. He boosted his interest in the Daly West to an undivided half interest, and by the time he got to the Daly Judge mine, it was entirely his operation. So the progression that you see over time is that he was a guy that sort of, placed these bets on different mines, and then he would sell his stock holdings as he went along. Ultimately, he became a very handy capitalist. By 1890, the Daly mine is showing huge dividends. In 91, he completes a mansion in Salt Lake City. Here's a photo of that mansion. In 1899, he finally sells the Daly West out to the Bamberger interests. By 1907, he stepped down from the Daly mine, although he still had an interest in the Daly West, as he was transitioning from miner to capitalist, he brought in a partner named Otto Hankey from Cincinnati. And together they actually mounted a challenge to the Bamberger interests. The Bambergers wanted to consolidate all of these properties and take advantage of the efficiency of moving all of the ore from these properties into a single operation, out a tunnel and into a single operation. And although they mounted a challenge to the Daly West in doing that, their challenge failed, right? So he's kind of moving back and away from mining as his principal business. At that same time, he's gearing up other businesses. In 1891, he becomes part of the Commercial National Bank. 1892, he's the founding president of the Park City National Bank. And those banks continued to develop. Merchant Bank as late as 1910 was kind of a big operation of his. And I just happened to come across this little $5 bill up in the corner there. That was actually issued by the Park City Bank in 1891. So in 1901, R.C. Chambers dies. Interestingly enough, they report actually on the net asset value of his properties. He's worth about almost $1 million flat in 1901. So the reason they were able to make those estimates is that all of his investments were fairly well concentrated in the Ontario and related properties. It'd be interesting to see the same kind of measure of John Daly's net worth at the time of his death. Unfortunately, nothing was reported in the newspaper, and so we don't really have a way to estimate that. So what did he do with these monies? Well, he became a real estate magnate, and Brian's going to talk about that.
So after taking vacations in California, after he retired from the mining business and spending a lot of time in Europe, in 1907, he retired completely from the Daly Judge as president and general manager. And again, he immediately shows interest in other mining properties in the Snake Creek and the Big Cottonwood mining districts. But it seems that he gets more heavily involved in real estate development in Salt Lake City. And he starts what's called the John J. Daly Company, which is a real estate investment company, and he makes major purchases of downtown commercial properties in Salt Lake City between State Street and West Temple Streets, and between 2nd and 4th South Streets. And in this area, starting in about 1909, he builds multiple commercial buildings, including the Moxham Hotel and the Daly Office Building. And then in the next few years, he goes on to build the New Grand Hotel, the Daly, the Lillard, and Independent Hotels. He starts the Syndicate Investment Company that also builds commercial buildings in that area. And so that company, with him at the helm, builds commercial buildings for Utah Savings and Trust Company, Sweet Candy, Decker Patrick Store, and Merchants State Bank. And all of these buildings were modern concrete and brick buildings, 3 to 5 stories tall, with elevators, full electric service, and all of his hotels had dedicated bathrooms in the hotel rooms or adjacent to the hotel, which was a luxury at the time. And so each of these projects reportedly cost over $250,000 at the time. Now that's worth more than $8 million each today. So we were just talking about what was this guy worth when he retired from the mining business, and here he's peeling off and able to attract investors and get mortgages at $8 million a crack for building after building that he's putting up in downtown Salt Lake. In addition to that commercial development, the John J. Daly Company becomes a leading real estate business in Salt Lake, offering commercial loans, building insurance, and rentals. So he gets involved very deeply in all aspects of real estate in Salt Lake City. So let's talk a little bit about John Daly and his involvement in society and as a civilian citizen. He was a member of the Elta Club in the 1880s and 1890s. And the Elta Club at that time was experiencing a wave of new members who were mining tycoons, and they're forever mentioned and remembered as leaders of the mining history in Utah. And so these guys joining the Elta Club included John Daly, J.E. Bamberger, R.C. Chambers, Thomas Kearns, David Keith, James Ivers, Samuel Newhouse, and on and on. Daly was the club president in 1898 and 1899, and you know, he did not seek political positions, but his associates and friends urged him to participate. So he joined the Republican Party and was a delegate at the 1896 National Convention. The Utah governor appointed him to the Territorial Loan Commission, and he was elected to the Salt Lake City Council in 1890 and became a member of the Board of Regents of the University of Desiree, later becoming the University of Utah. And so he and his wife, Eliza, were major contributors to the construction of the Cathedral de Madeleine in Salt Lake City when all this was going on. So John and Eliza Daly were quite involved in Salt Lake City society. Starting in 1887 and through 1916, if you look at the Salt Lake Tribune archives, you see many newspaper accounts of their participation in parties and different celebrations and fundraisers. They began to spend more time in Los Angeles, particularly during 1916, coming back to Salt Lake City occasionally to visit their children and grandchildren here in Salt Lake City. And there was a special event, a social event in 1917 in Salt Lake where Mrs. Daly was honored, and she said that she was now leaving Salt Lake City to make a new home in Los Angeles. Thereafter, there were some reports of her visiting Salt Lake City and her family also visiting them in Los Angeles, but there's really no record of John J. Daly coming back to Utah. The Dalys had 7 kids, and by the 1920s, their 4 daughters and 1 son were all living in California. Their sons John C. and Albert M. Daly lived on in Salt Lake City. The Dalys had 14 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren before John J. Daly passed away. It was reported that he was confined to his home in his last year, being attended to by Eliza. He died on October 22nd, 1927, at the age of 74. Eliza died in 1939 in Los Angeles from injuries she received in a traffic accident, and she was 81. So this closes the story about John Joseph Daly, whose childhood was very difficult, with no clear indication of his later success. But he seemed to rapidly advance in his knowledge of mining in Montana, and especially in Nevada, entering a silver boom there just at the ideal time for him to be immersed in the boom with everything to learn about the silver mining business. And at 23, he arrives in Utah just when many mining claims were being located here and developed, and he quickly rose in the ranks of mine developers. Isn't timing everything? By 32 years old, he had started his first mining operation, and by age 49, he controlled 5 more successful mines in Empire Canyon, just outside of Park City. And this must have led to immense wealth, and we just really can't identify what that wealth was. But it had to lead to immense wealth that supported his comfortable life after mining for another 25 years. Not bad for an orphaned cabin boy starting out on a Missouri River steamboat. And that completes our presentation. Thank you.
So I chose the right speaking partner, didn't I? Any questions? I think we covered it all. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Oh, we got one. Right. So Sid is asking. I'm just going to repeat the question for the recording. She's asking, was Daly part of basically the Park City gang? Right. There were people who lived in Salt Lake City. Most of the Park City miners, when they retired, they moved to Salt Lake, and there was kind of a row of mansions. My sense is that Daly was among the more quiet members of that. There were that Tom Kearns and the Silver Queen were much more flamboyant partiers. But Brian has uncovered the fact that indeed they were active as well. I think a little bit more oriented towards philanthropy than pure hell raising. Well, the Silver Queen had houses in lots of different places, and that's pretty much how she spent her fortune, was building and fixing up houses. Is the silver exhausted? I'm going to turn that one over to Brian.
Actually, no. There's a lot of silver underground here in Park City, as well as lead and zinc and copper. Back in the 1960s, the United Park City Mining Company made a strategic decision that their future was more aligned in real estate development and recreational development in Park City instead of mining. And so they know very well that there's a lot of wealth left underground here. But I think it's probably a right decision. Mining has always been a risky business. You can make tremendous wealth in mining, and at the same time, you can lose a lot of money in mining. It has risks. And I think if you compare those mining risks to what we now all see as far as real estate development in Park City, I think the mining company made the right decision. Any other questions? They may have. I don't think either of us have really done much research on that side of the situation. He was there for a decade before he passed away. He continued to keep his business associations reportedly in Salt Lake City. And so the John J. Daly Company continued, the syndicate continued, and he was not actively involved in those operations, but he still had equity involvement in those. So I don't know if he spread himself into the Los Angeles real estate business as well. I just don't know. Anything else? Thanks, folks. Good evening.